Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Martin, and happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, I have the promised interview with Stephan Kerby from Mindscape Psychedelic Institute. He came on the other week so that we could discuss the new book that he has just released, Trauma-Informed 5-MeO-DMT Facilitation, an Educational Manual. I was his editor and book Sherpa for this book. It was a pleasure to work on it with Kerby and excited to bring Kerby back onto the podcast today to share with you all about it. We'll get to that in just a minute, but first, a few announcements. We'd like to thank Brooke and Ben for making contributions in support of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast via PayPal. Thank you guys very much. If you would like to make a PayPal donation, it's quite easy. Stop by my personal webpage, martinball.net. There's a PayPal link up at the top right of the page. There is also a link there that gets you over to my Patreon page, which is another great way to support this podcast. There's everything from $1 a month up to $100 a month. There is no obligation. You can change your level at any time. You can come and go as you please, but it's a great way to support me and the podcast. And of course, at the top tiers of Cap and God Molecule, those come with a 30 or 60-minute monthly video call with me. This is a great opportunity if you are looking for some ongoing support or even some mentorship. I do work with facilitators, integration coaches, and people just looking for ongoing support and reflection for their own process. It's a great way to do that. And again, there is no obligation, so you can do that for as long or as little as you may like. And of course, if you would just like to set up a video call with me directly, I am available for 30, 60, and 90-minute calls. Just stop by at www.nondualentheogenicintegration.com for more details about that. Or of course, you could just reach out directly to me. All right, only one other thing that I want to announce today, and that is that I am very excited to let you, the listening audience, know that I have now determined the dates for my next offering of the 5-MeO-DMT Integration Specialist Training with Mindscape Institute. I have set the start date for the next class as September 17th. Basically, it's going to be a fall semester or fall term class. Going to be taking this summer off from teaching that one, but looking forward to getting back in with a new batch of students. And if you are interested, we will have things set up at the mindscapeinstitute.org website very shortly for you can go to the opt-in page and get more information. Or if you are interested, you can just go ahead and reach out directly to me at martinwball@gmail.com, and I'll get you on the list and we can discuss your participation in the class. As with this last round, it's going to be limited to 15 individuals. It is a 9-week course going through quite a bit of materials that I have produced over the past 17 years around 5-MeO-DMT, really focusing on the materials in my two books, Entheogenic Liberation and 5-MeO-DMT Integration, Embodying Non-Duality is Not What You Think, and getting into a lot more other topics. Really enjoyed that first 9-week course with my first batch of students and am excited to be offering this again for anyone who might be interested. As I've mentioned a couple times now, there's the Mindscape website. It's mindscapeinstitute.org. You can also find out about the Trauma-Informed 5-MeO-DMT Facilitator Training Course. I think the next round of that is going to be starting in October. We are just starting with our current batch of students in that one. And there's other educational opportunities over there at Mindscape. So check it out. And let's go ahead and get into this conversation with Kerby. The book that we created from the class is now available in paperback and ebook via Kindle at Amazon. And I invite you to check it out. And here is Kerby to tell us all about it, kind of getting into the process of the book, how it relates to the materials in the class, what we added to it, what we changed, and all of those cool insider details. So here it is. Enjoy. All right. Well, I am now welcoming back onto the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, return offender Kerby. Stephan Kerby of Mindscape Psychedelic Institute, who I'm sure my audience knows is definitely a colleague of mine. We work together at Mindscape to teach the 5-MeO DMT facilitation course. And the whole purpose for this particular interview is that Kerby is now joining the still relatively small club of authors who have written books about 5-MeO DMT. And just to smack you down, I'm still the king. I still have written the most books about it, but you have now entered the field, and I'm excited to introduce your book to the listening audience and talk about what's new there, what's different there, and what it is adding to the available discourse around 5-MeO DMT in book format. So, Kerby, welcome back to the show for the, I don't know, fifth, however many times it is at this point. I don't know if you've been keeping track.
I haven't, but always appreciate it. And thank you for having me back. Always fun.
Yeah. So the book just came out like, was it 2 weeks ago now? I think.
Pretty recent. I just got my own copy. Other people were
Awesome.
receiving theirs before mine. I think as the author, I didn't get any special privileges, so I just got mine a couple days ago. So it's still pretty hot off the press.
Awesome. So for the listening audience, the full title of the book is Trauma-Informed 5-MeO DMT Facilitation and Educational Manual. And there's a lot I could say about the book because I was involved in it, but we want to hear from you. So where did the book come from? What's the book about? And let's just start right there.
Yeah, well, again, first off, it's important for people that are listening that are looking at it that the book wouldn't have happened without you, and that's an absolute fact. When I brought the idea to you, essentially for the class, we worked on together just kind of the facilitation manual, which was essentially the textbook for the class. And each, iteration of the class, it kept evolving and adjusting. And I thought maybe this would be an interesting book if we added some like anecdotal stories, some analogies, and just a little bit more, information from a story point to kind of lock in these themes that we're discussing and make it more interesting and more enjoyable. And when I brought the idea to you, you were excited about it. Like, I think it's a good idea. And I'm like, okay, well, let's do this. So essentially, it was just originally designed to be for the students of the class. And then as we worked through it, the thought was, well, maybe this could be good for some other facilitators. A lot of the students that come to our class took other facilitation courses, or worked with other facilitators, but they still come to the class and feel what they're gaining from the class and the experience of the class is important. So we thought, well, maybe there's some information that we can share with other facilitators or people maybe that are just interested in stepping into this space, and so forth. So again, the amount of feedback that you gave, again, you could have got for sure more credit on it. You put the forward and you were an editor. But as just for folks that are listening, as you kind of went through each section, you would write some things, write some information, and I'd go back and see the note and say, "Gosh, he's right. This we should add this, or we should put this in there. Let's discuss that." So your support on it is, again, I've probably thanked you 1,000 times for it. There's 1,001, but your support, your insight, and your knowledge in this topic absolutely made it what it is. And I'm pretty excited and pretty proud of what it ended up being. And I think people that pick it up will enjoy it. Again, even if, because yes, it was a textbook, but I think with the different stories that we put in there and just explanations, I think it's going to have some pieces that everybody would enjoy. And, just in general, we did the class, we did the book because it's, psychedelic facilitation spaces, it's growing rapidly. And, while that's exciting, it's also risky, right? Many of the people, are feeling this call to serve 5-MeO DMT, but, in my opinion, without adequate training, they could just unintentionally cause harm, even when their intentions are good, which is usually the case, right? So to me, this book could distill years of personal experience, teaching, mistakes that I've made, mistakes that I've seen other people make. some trauma-informed insight and practical tools kind of really into the manual. And just to point out, because I know it's going to be probably one of the hot buttons for people, it's not designed or meant to replace training, right? It's
Yeah.
meant to guide facilitators in doing their own work and kind of lay the foundation for a safe and ethical transformative practice. But, you know, you need more than the book, right? And I think it's important because it centers on what really matters, not the peak mystical experience, but the integration, the safety, the relationship that surrounds it. So I think the book shifts the focus from spectacle to stewardship. But yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback. You read it to nausea, I'm sure, as you were editing it.
Yeah, I certainly went through it quite a few times. Something that comes to mind, actually, that I would just want to clarify for the listening audience, just so there's no mistake, that when did I put this out? We've got my book from 2022, which is entitled Facilitating 5-MeO DMT, an anthology of approaches to serving the God molecule. And then we have your new book, which is Trauma-Informed 5-MeO DMT Facilitation. And just to kind of help people distinguish, like, what is the difference between these books and what's going on here? Why is your book so different? Is that when I did this Facilitating 5-MeO DMT book, as the subtitle says, it's an anthology. And like I write in my own introduction to the book, this is not a book that covers how to facilitate 5-MeO DMT. That is not the purpose of this book. The purpose of this book is to give people who do facilitate 5-MeO DMT a platform and an arena in which they can discuss what their practices are, why they do what they do, how they came into it, how they were trained, if at all, so that it's more of a sociological snapshot of just looking at what are people doing around the world, how are they working with it. And there's a couple chapters in the appendices about, best practices and things like that. Like I included some information from the conclave, but that's not the aim of the book. Is not for somebody to read that book and then learn, okay, now I'm going to start facilitating because I've got all this information. So this is where there has not been a book written on this topic from the how-to perspective. And this is where, with your book, coming out of the class, I think it was just like the perfect evolution. And this is always something that I'm interested in. Like when I talk to authors or people who work on projects, I always like to ask, like, okay, so where did it start? Like, how did it begin? And so you already shared a little bit of that, but I'll just go ahead and reiterate a few things that you mentioned. That first, you created an outline for the course. This is before we ever started teaching the course, which is now, that was like over a year ago, right? Put together an outline. You sent that to me, and I added some things like, okay, how about a little bit of this, a little bit of this. And then for that first round of the class, the 5 to 6 month long class, you had created a text. And I don't know if I had seen the entire thing. And then eventually I downloaded that and I looked at it and I was like, oh, there's some things in here I want to change. And I want to add a few things. And then it got even more expanding that, and we did more back and forth and like, okay, well, let's flesh this out more. And so then we had sort of like the working textbook for the class. And then with the question of where you were saying, well, I want to turn it into a book. And that's where I was like, well, okay, we'll put some more information about you in there, put some stories in there. And then I also found that I was trying to distinguish what I had put in versus what you had put in. So I put in all the like editor's notes, and it felt kind of clumsy because there was kind of two different voices taking place there. And I really like that you took the notes that I had put in there and ultimately put it into your own voice. And so in a sense, we kind of erased me from the book, which I think was a really good thing to do, so that it can really be your book. And then I served as the editor and formatter. And then, more broadly speaking, we could say I was your book Sherpa, like taking it from this little seed and then germinating it into a much larger project, and then guiding it along into both the paperback and the ebook versions. And I really like this end product. I think it's really, really great. So what I'd like to do is invite you to talk about And we've talked about this before here on the podcast, but since we're doing this interview, let's go ahead and let's review again that the class itself, the facilitating the trauma-informed 5-MeO DMT facilitation through Mindscape Institute, is a 5 to 6 month long program. And like many online classes, it's broken down into modules, and each module is about a month long. So maybe explain to the listening audience what these different modules are and then how they're reflected in the overall structure of the book.
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, just I'll reiterate it one last time because again, as I was writing this and going through it, I probably mentioned to it a few times. I'm like, people are going to have concerns that we're writing a book on facilitation, right? So you can't learn to facilitate 5-MeO DMT from a book, right? And kind of the analogy I use is you also can't learn to surf from a book, but you can learn about the oceans, the tides, the risks, the type of boards. So the book really can help prepare you and orient you and give you a sense of what to expect, but the real learning happens in the water, right? So it's just important that people know that because we've seen a few comments like you can't learn to facilitate from a book. If you read the book, you'd see that we talk about that quite a bit. But
And actually, I want to jump on that for just a moment with you because I think that that's a really important point. And I think that at least in some avenues in the psychedelic world, there's almost this sense of like, well, don't write a book about it because then you're giving people information that maybe they are not going to be adequately trained in this area. So it's like, but that's just kind of weird because it feels like, well, are we supposed to keep this secret? Are we like not supposed to share this valid and useful information? Especially knowing that there are lots of people out there who are facilitating, who have had zero training at all. Like, I would love for them to get this book and look at, whoa, here's people who actually teach this stuff. This is what they think is important. And as somebody had commented like online saying, oh, that's really cavalier to produce this book and like people will think that they're trained. And my comment back was, well, we do have the course that people can join the course. And it doesn't have to be our course. I mean, there are other facilitation courses. I think ours is probably one of the best out there. It's the most comprehensive. But I think that I always err on the side of education. Like,
yes.
Let's give people information because they're doing it anyway.
Yes.
So why not get them a book that says, look, if you really want to be ethical and conscientious, here are some things you should take into consideration.
And I think that is the most important piece of what we're trying to do. And I've had this conversation with so many people, right? There's a lot of, I don't love the term necessarily gatekeeping in the facilitation community because I understand the concerns about people just hopping into the space. I completely understand that and it's valid. But we also know humans are humans. Some people, they feel special in that space, so they're being protective of it, or they're coming from a place of lack and don't want competition. And to me, ultimately, at the end of the day, if you want to help people, and that's where I came. I mean, I'm in the middle of the country. There's nobody else really facilitating around me. Now there are some people that have taken the course. I mean, I had a 6-month waiting list, and it ultimately was, if you really want to help people, well, we need more good trauma-informed, skilled people doing this work. And as people were coming to me, as a lot of facilitators have people that come and train them, well, you've got a couple options. One, as you articulated, they're going to do it anyway. People have access to these medicines now. They're going to do it. Maybe they went to a ceremony with, the traditional pipe lighter, showed up, had a ceremony, had a mystical experience, and they're like, well, I can do that, right? So they're going to do it anyway. So we've got a couple options with folks that are interested in doing it, considering doing it, or are going to do it. We could kind of push them away and say, no, you're not ready for it, right? Or we can bring them closer and teach them and train them and prepare them for it. And I think one of the most exciting parts of the work that we're doing is when we get to the end of the class or get, any part throughout the class, but usually at the end when folks that came in that were already facilitating or just started facilitating or were very excited about it, and then they've decided to slow down. Like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. That actually tells me that we're doing the right thing. It's almost like I jokingly say we're like a little bit of a speed bump from the people that were going to do it to prevent them, not to prevent them, but just to slow them down and let them understand the depth of what they're getting into, the responsibility that they're about to walk into, and how crucial it is to have the right training. So people need to understand that aspect of it.
Yeah. So let's get back then into the actual structure of the class and how that's reflected in the book. And I'll start it by saying that for the book itself, what I ended up doing was writing a foreword for the book. So that's where it all starts. And then we have an introduction that you've put in, more about your own personal introduction to 5-MeO. And I want to come back to that. But then the remaining chapters of the book, each one focuses on one of the modules from the course. So it comes directly from the sequence and order of how things are taught in the class itself. So what are those different modules? What are those different topics, and how is the educational program structured?
Yeah, and you were responsible for the beautiful cover art as well. So let's make sure you get credit for that as well. But yeah, as you mentioned, we walked through essentially five different modules. The first module is introductory and preparatory phase, and that really is, well, what I hope that people get from the class is not just learn how to facilitate, but to also this level of personal growth. And that's what I have the most gratitude towards about doing this work, is how I evolved as a person, as a husband and a father and a friend, right? There's an opportunity while working with this medicine and growing with this medicine and creating this relationship with the medicine that we could also evolve. And I think that's important because I think how we show up in the space absolutely has an impact on the space. So we really start off like, something as simple as, why do you want to do this work? And it sounds like a silly question, but undoubtedly the first answer is always, well, I want to help people. So first week, we always say, why do you want to do this work? And the answer can't be, I want to help people. Let's put a little thought into it. Is it slightly ego driven because you find it exciting, or whatever the reason? So it's really starting with, why do you want to do this work, and how can we show up to this work effectively, and start shedding some of these layers or this desire to be special or to be seen or to be the guru or the shaman, right? And I think that's important because we already have a lot of that out there kind of polluting the facilitation space, in my opinion. And so how do we start working on those aspects of the ego, of letting them go? And then we move into like theoretical foundations. Again, understanding history of 5-MeO, chemical compounds, different, forms of 5-MeO, how it could be utilized, right? I think one of the areas that I'm most excited about that we've kind of added to the manual and added to the book is, most folks have been facilitated in one fashion, right? There's only a couple ways that folks are doing it. And in the book we talked about, my introduction was more in a shamanic fashion, but since then it's switched because of your book, Entheogenic Liberation, probably the best book on the market on this topic, but to more of a non-dual energetic therapy lens, and then to more of a therapeutic lens, right? So there's multiple lenses you can view this work and work through, and they're all okay. They're all okay. And it's also important to understand the pros and cons of each, and to give yourself permission to move through them and shift and adjust and change, right? As I did. And I think that's one of the things I'm most grateful for, is working through all these different lenses and having a good perspective on all of them, that, I feel pretty comfortable that I've created something that's really authentic to me. So it's helping people structure a practice that feels authentic to them. I think both of us say throughout the class to nausea, it's like, look, this is my way. It's just a way. It's not the way. It's important that you show up authentically. But most people that have had these experiences have had one type of experience. And it's important that they know there's multiple ways to work with this.
Yeah.
Then we shift to module 3, which is ethics and professional conduct. And again, a big piece of this, my wife's a therapist, psychedelic therapist. I'm more than halfway through my master's degree in therapy. I think, the therapeutic model has some pros and cons to it, just as a traditional facilitation model has some pros and cons to it. But ethics, professional conduct, how we show up, it's extremely important. And I don't think ethics and professional conduct are talked about enough, especially in the area of informed consent, proper intake, medical intake, psychological evaluations. How are we preparing people for this experience? I share in the book from my experience. I just showed up. Nobody talked to me. I actually showed up to do NN-DMT. They didn't have it. So they're like, you want to do Bufo? And I'm like, okay. And next thing you know, I took 2 massive doses and got tossed to a tapestry. It changed my life, but for other people, that is a traumatic experience and can have extremely negative impacts. So with the amount of people that are having destabilized experiences, how do we minimize that? And it's through a good intake process and a therapeutic relationship with the client. So having this therapeutic lens as part of it, I think, is extremely important. And that's where that trauma-informed aspect comes. And I know that's a word that's been, overused maybe, or it's being used a lot. There's trauma-informed yoga and trauma-informed cacao ceremonies. And I'm saying that lightly, and I'm not picking on them. I'm sure they're phenomenal, but it's like we find these words in our society and we kind of lock in, and then everything is that. But this is that. Again, it's gone through this therapeutic lens. And then obviously, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let's center on that for just a moment. So,
Yeah.
Because this is not just an add-on in the class. This is a main focus within the class of this understanding of trauma and how it presents, the different categories of trauma, and then how trauma can potentially be triggered by different actions, different sensations, different emotions, the ways that interactions happen between a facilitator and a client or a participant. Now, this is something that you and both you and your wife, I believe, have had formal training in this area of trauma. So tell us a little bit about that. What is the background there? And then applying it in the context of 5-MeO facilitation.
Yeah, my first certification course was somatic therapy, essentially, or somatic therapy for integration, where the whole lens was taught by a phenomenal trauma coach. And that was my first really understanding of how impactful it was. Just things like words, right? When you say this could trigger this person in this way. How you dress could trigger somebody in this way. And as my wife went through, her master's in therapy, and she's been doing psychedelic therapy for near a decade now, just being able to work with her in the space and see how we dress could make a difference. What type of tapestries or posters we have on the wall can make a difference. Are you working with somebody with religious trauma? Okay, well, what do you have a picture of Jesus on the wall and you're facilitating? So all these things, all the way down to like some of these micro elements that we just kind of take for granted, are going to have an impact. And not just for the participant, but you as the facilitator. Have you addressed your own trauma? How is your trauma showing up in the space? Are you being triggered by the participant, right? Are you somebody that potentially has been in a relationship where there was an affair? It's just one that comes to me recently, one of the folks I'm working with, and now they're working with a client that's sharing about their affair, and they're being triggered by that. And then how you're showing up for that participant based on this trigger, right? So there's a lot to it. And I think it's important to note that, yes, the entire class is under this umbrella of trauma-informed care. Down to the intake process, again, down to how we show up, how we dress, how we speak, how we do integration, what type of words are we using, eye contact. The entire lens, I think, needs to be looked through this. And it's often overlooked because I think a lot of facilitators just aren't trained in that.
Yeah. And so this is an area that I think is becoming more and more incorporated into the world of psychedelic therapy, psychedelic facilitation, integration. But here again is where your book stands out as unique, that this is the first book-length treatment of this topic, specifically in the realm of 5-MeO DMT facilitation. That there is, to my knowledge, there is nothing else out there that uses this lens and applies it to this particular area of practice. And so even just right there, I think even that is a good response to anybody who would say, oh, but you're putting out this information and people are going to think that they're going to be able to facilitate just by reading this book. It's like, this again is where this can really help people who are already perhaps facilitating to get some education around this issue. And it's relatively new in the therapeutic world. So it's understandable. Like if somebody's been facilitating for like 10, 15 years or something like that and think, oh, I already know everything. Well, this is actually a new lens, relatively speaking.
Right.
And so you just might not be aware of it. So I think that there's a lot that people can get out of it. And to kind of second the point that you made that I've certainly seen this in the 2 rounds of the class that we've taught so far. Many of the people who are in the facilitation course are already facilitating. And the same thing was true for my 5-MeO integration specialist training class that just wrapped up this week. Almost everybody in the class is already serving 5-MeO to people. And of course, that class was not around facilitation, it was around the topic of integration. But these are all people who are already in the field, already practicing, and they want to learn more about how do I help people with aftercare? How do I help people with integration? So there's still so much that people can learn, even if they feel like, well, I'm already in the field, I'm already established. Like there's always room to grow. And in other areas of life, because this is a completely unregulated area, but in a lot of businesses or professions, they would call this professional growth, right?
Yes.
So you're already a teacher, great. You still need to pursue professional growth, right? So there's still always room to learn more. And I think that this is just something that's very valuable, especially when you and I have talked about this a lot. We talk about it with the students where, we watch videos of people being facilitated for, and we've seen some pretty horrendous stuff
Yeah.
out there.
Uh, I think if you are facilitating already, I would like get the book, spend the $9 on Kindle. If you find nothing in it of value, let me know. I'll send you the $9 back. I'd be surprised if there's nothing in that book that you would find valuable, right? This isn't just, my perspective, but this is, again, your insight. We've got 2 other professors in the class that are extremely highly trained. This is from, hundreds of ceremonies, thousands of participation in ceremony. And there's a lot that went into this. And again, there's aspects of it that we keep learning, or at least I keep learning. And so I'm like, we're going to have a second edition at some stage because this medicine is essentially new to some degree. Yes, it's been around for a while, but compared to psilocybin and LSD and some of these other medicines, it's been essentially facilitated the same way or very similar ways for the last 20, 30, 40 years, right? But now we're learning a little bit more about these different routes of administration. When would you use this route of administration over this route of administration, right? If you're working with somebody that's maybe has some heavy background trauma, maybe insufflation is a better route of administration because it allows their nervous system, or in the parts world, IFS world, their parts to kind of get comfortable with that and negotiate it a little bit versus just smashing through those and creating this rubber band effect. And so there's just lots of opportunity for continued growth. And I mean, I'm part of a group that we continue to learn, and I'm constantly trying to learn. So those are the people, just to be honest, that as we're interviewing people for the class, those are the people I'm really not super interested in being part of the class, is the ones that think they've got it all figured out. As a matter of fact, I've got 2 students from your integration class that I just met with today that have been facilitating. And then as we went through the conversation, they were like, okay, there's a lot that I don't know yet. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I respect those people that are like, hey, I want to do a great job at this. I want to make sure that I'm not traumatizing people. I want to make sure that I'm doing it safely. If you have more information than me, then I want that information. Those are the right people for this space in general. And again, understanding that, and I know we have a slight disagreement potentially on this, but the majority, at least the majority of people that are coming to us to have these medicine experiences are bringing some level of trauma, right? That it could be a small T or a big T, but they're coming with something. And we have an opportunity to either help them work through that on some level or add to it. And to me, the work here is to try to remove that or help them work through that eventually, but not add to it. But what we're seeing is a lot of the folks that you integrate and I integrate, they're actually that trauma is exasperated or magnified by going through these experiences, and that should be a concern to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if it might have been contributed to in some way by the person who's facilitating, or if there was a lack of proper integration afterwards. I don't think we've talked about that module yet, but that's one of the modules within the class as well, is focusing on integration. And that's a place also where you and I have different approaches. And I know that you do like to bring in different teachers within the class. And so people talk about their methods, their approach. And again, it's not like there's a right or wrong here, but that even this, we've talked about this before, that the whole concept of integration through psychedelic work is also something that is relatively new. It does not have a long-standing history in the world of psychedelics. And that even just the use of the word, it's really only been within like the past 5 or so years that has been touted as, oh, well, if you're going to have facilitation, well, now we know you've got to have preparation and intake, then you have to have facilitation, and then you need to have integration. And so it's kind of broken down to this tripartite model. But it's relatively new. And like within my book on 5-MeO facilitation, integration, and this is what we talk about in the class, is that I point out that, it's so new that there's no uniform agreement about what is integration. And my position that I promote within my own book and within the class, both the facilitation class and the integration class, is that I think 5-MeO is so fundamentally unique that it requires a very specialized set of skills and knowledge and models to work with, so that we can bring in other aspects of psychedelic integration from other psychedelics. But if we only do that, then I think that there's going to be something missing from that, because 5-MeO is so fundamentally different that we need to have a specialized approach. And that's why these kinds of classes and these kinds of books, I think, are really valuable. And again, there's no other books out there on these topics. So
no, and I'd say I'm in total agreement with you. And even going through your course, like I was behind the scenes watching the videos. I didn't want to be a disruption of the class, and I was in my master's program, but I'm still watching the videos. Again, this is where I'm still learning and still interested. I completely agree. Right, with a traditional psychedelic experience, there's some material almost to work with. I was in the space and I had this experience and I saw this. Great, I could integrate, I could work with that. This is a completely different experience. It does require a different level of integration. So I think if you are facilitating in this space and you haven't taken your integration class, I think you're missing a huge opportunity. Again, if you're facilitating, you should take 5-MeO integration. It is a different process. And again, what I'm seeing in the community and the space as a whole is, again, what I call the pipers, right? You show up, they serve the experience, and they kind of poof into the ether, right? I think if you're bringing people through this entire process, from intake process to creating some sort of therapeutic or facilitator relationship with them, where there's some trust, you're walking them through this experience, you should be able to integrate them, or you at least should consider that, boy, I should also help them work through this integration process, but you need the skill set to do that. And what we're seeing, and again, which the work you're doing is so important, people are walking them up, serving the big experience, and then they're like, I've done my job, I've kind of gotten the glory, and then I'm going to slide into the ether. And people are missing out on the biggest opportunity. People already know that integration is necessary. But with this medicine specifically, the opportunity to work with this integration, what we're talking about before we started this, is it's not uncommon for somebody to have this huge mystical experience, life-altering experience, but then 3 to 4 weeks later, they're like, I kind of feel the same again. We missed a massive opportunity. It's not the medicine. The medicine is just kind of opening the door to this awakening process, right? If you don't step in, you don't embody it, you don't take it on, you're going to shift back to your usual baseline personality. And that to me is a huge missed opportunity. It's too big of an experience. It's too valuable of an experience for you to step through that or not step through that door and get these long-term benefits. It's so common, though, the amount of people we've talked to, or I've even seen on some Facebook posts, yeah, I did it. It was fine. I'm like, you didn't do it right. You didn't get the full experience and you didn't get the full integration, or it would have absolutely changed your life.
So a word that you just used in that response there was around embodying it. Now, something that comes up in the book a lot and mentioned in kind of your biography of your particular training is like somatic therapy. So I wonder if you could just share with us a little bit about that background and that approach and then how it gets worked into the material within the book. And then I also want to ask you about another thing that was added into the book that I think you just kind of briefly touched on there, which is your idea of the 6-month protocol. So that's a little foreshadowing, but let's talk about the somatic aspect and where you got training around somatics and then how you incorporate that into the facilitation course and why it's important.
Yeah, and I want to be cautious because there's my sister is one, so, my good friend Shannon is one, is the full-fledged somatic practitioner, right? It's 3 to 4 years of training, full-blown. They're on a whole nother level, right? I have an interest in that, but as it relates to the class and relates to just entry-level integration, and I think that's fair to say we do integration for about a month. I think it could be a 3 or 4 month module on integration. It's so important. So we're just really getting into it and getting them into that mode. And that's why, again, I would recommend even, and maybe we should have that conversation sometime. How do we kind of blend it together? So they're giving this longer integration. But from the somatic perspective, again, a lot of folks are just, they're in their own head, right? So they're trying to analyze everything all the time. They're trying to make logical sense of it. And kind of the analogy I use sometimes, it's like when you have this 5 experience and, prior to my first experience, I read lots of books on Buddhism. It's like, yeah, I'm one with everything, right? Yeah, I'm one with everything, right? I get it. Unconditional love for sure. Once you've embodied that, once you go through this experience and you are in that space and completely are embodying it energetically, you're like, oh, I'm one with everything. And it's shifting it from this intellectual concept, right, into this full-fledged embodied experience of what it really is. And so that's what we're trying to do with the experience. Even after they have that, it's like, how do we make that stick? How can you embody that on a day-to-day basis so it becomes more of your baseline reality? Most people are in what we call a high beta state, fight or flight constantly. They're driving to work, somebody cuts them off, and they're just reacting to reality. To me, what you can do with this medicine is it gives you an opportunity when you do it right, and that's kind of what the embodiment or 6-month protocol is like it can create a pause when done properly, where I'm driving to work. I remember somebody cut me off, and instead of my typical reaction of honking the horn or getting upset, I could feel my body starting to get upset, right? But my mind, there was a space, there was a separation of like, oh, I could witness my body starting to react, right? In that pause, your whole life could absolutely change. In that pause, you're able to then dictate what your response will be. And the response to me was, okay, observe the body, witness the body, feeling frustrated, feeling this energy, feeling this anger. Okay, let's just sit here for a minute. And the more you can work with those type of scenarios, slowly but surely, first it was 10 seconds, my body would feel it. Then it was 8, 6, 5. If somebody cuts me off, I'll still feel it, but it's such a fleeting moment. It's such a fleeting experience, and then it's gone. So you're retraining your body. Everybody is just a programmed reaction to reality. And with this medicine, you have an opportunity to see this program. You get to see how you're reacting to everything. And the moment you're able to see it and create a little bit of pause between the stimulus and the reaction, there's a space for a response. And I love the phrase, like, to change your personality, you need to change your personal reality, which is your thoughts, emotions, and feelings, right? And to do that, you have to create this pause. And I think that's kind of the somatic concept to me of witnessing the body, allowing the body, feeling into the body, and not trying to intellectually make these changes, but embody them. And I think what we're seeing through these embodiment protocols is, instead of folks having this experience and then 3 to 4 weeks later, they're kind of back to their baseline, which was mine. I remember when it started fleeting, I went into a panic. I'm like, I don't want to be the same person I was. All right, I want to maintain this thing. So I rushed back to the medicine, right? If we could expand this consciousness, this awareness, this awakening for a month, 6 months, a year, and it becomes like any habit, you're trying to make that conscious perspective, this awakened perspective, this ability to respond versus react, your baseline reality. And that's what changes everything, because that's the new lens that you're walking through reality with. And I think that is a missed opportunity if you're not getting good integration, if you're not working with this medicine properly, if you're just showing up for the mystical experience. Could be beautiful, could be incredible, but it will become fleeting. And I think that's one of the things I'd love to see that we change in this space, is just offer an alternative to how this could be worked with.
Yeah. So then this ended up being one of those things where we're going back and forth with the book, where you send me, here's your latest iteration of it, and then I'm editing it and formatting it and, doing all that editor-like work. And then I send it back to you. It's like, okay, now you review it. And then you send it back like, well, here's some more things. Let's put this in. And so this was one of these things, was this 6-month protocol. So this was kind of a late addition into the book. It is the first time that I had heard you reference that. It had not come up in class yet, but obviously this was something that was kind of brewing in your mind. And now that's very much a part of the book. It's mentioned in several different places within the book, where you talk about this idea of doing a 6-month protocol, so that, along the lines of what you're saying now, that it's more about reconditioning your sense of reality and your sense of embodied reaction. So here's the invitation to tell us a little bit more about that, and what was the inspiration for the 6-month protocol and the decision to include that into the book? And is that also now being incorporated into the class? We've just started the next round of the class. So I think you've had one meeting with the new students so far, but will this be within the curriculum as we move through this current term of the class?
Yeah, and it's something that I've been working on for a couple of years now, and I wanted to work with some participants through it and then work through it myself a little bit more. But it's becoming what we're seeing, and again, you're the witness to this, is more and more of the people that are showing up to our class are therapists, right? And so they've been looking for an alternative model to the just, again, show up, have this big mystical experience and move on. They have a therapeutic relationship with their clients. They've been working with their clients for months. They want a little bit more titrated, type setup versus, again, just this big. They have concerns because what they're doing is not technically legal in most places. They have fear of a large experience and the destabilization that can come from it. And to me, again, it was the thought of, how do we make this stick? How do we, again, create this sustainable shift in baseline consciousness, not just this temporary high peak experience? And, the protocol, to me, it really bridges the gap by training the mind and the body and the nervous system before and after the peak experience. So it builds both, contemplative practices, modern neuroscience, particularly neuroplasticity, state-dependent learning, and, some of this anterior cortex training. So to condition the participants' capacity for presence, self-regulation, and awareness. And, there's kind of 3-4 main parts that I won't touch on all of them, but the neuroplasticity and baseline rewiring is a big piece of it. So each week, participants engage in this carefully designed micro practices. Some level of meditation, some breath work, values clarification. So we're taking in some of these therapeutic models like acceptance and commitment therapy, intentional discomfort exercises. It's all designed to stimulate this neuroplastic change, right? These are like integration reps. It's allowing the nervous system to build up these pathways necessary for sustained shifts in perception, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. Right? We're not just teaching information. We're installing essentially a new operating system. And again, to change your personality, you have to change your personal reality. So how do you make these micro shifts so you are showing up differently? What's another good one? State familiarization before the peak of because again, what I'm finding is, so essentially the protocol, what we do over 5 to 6 months, is we're starting off with medium to medium high doses, right? We're titrating them into this experience. And if you're listening to this and you've had the full experience, right? Your first experience was this full experience. And let's say that experience, when you're in completely offline, you're in zero, right? Zero state, completely unaware of your reality. And the person you were when you walked in was 10, right? So if we use a scale 0 to 10, as soon as you start becoming aware of yourself, Well, you're like 1, 2, 3, 4. Eventually, you're back to your baseline. And I think 1 through 9 is often overlooked, right? Most people are being sold the experience like you connect with God, you're one with everything. I think that zero state is a somatic experience. Again, I think it's the most powerful, energetic experience a human could have. And I'm convinced it's because the ego is offline. So it's the first time most humans are able to just surrender into this experience and allow their body to work through it energetically. And I know you will touch on that. But once they're coming back online, there's this opportunity to get in these what I call reps, right? Your ego's kind of bobbing and weaving back in. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm here. And if you could learn to surrender, you could expand into that non-dual space again. You're expanding your conscious. You're moving into that alpha state, that theta state. So you're shifting your consciousness. And then as you're doing that, you're like, okay, I don't like the music. You're back, right? And you're like, shh, surrender. So you have these repetitions, but isn't that how we walk through reality, right? Like we don't just sit and meditate in the morning and expand. We're in traffic. We're dealing with our kids. So you're training yourself to move from these beta states or these other states into this more conscious alpha state. So the longer that people could work in that 1 through 9 stage, the more that becomes their baseline reality. So the thought is over 5 to 6 months, you're training people to work in that state. You're training them to learn how to drive the car, so to speak. They're getting familiar with getting those reps in, and now they're able to maintain that consciousness. Music changes. They hear me walking around. My dog may bark. Doesn't matter, right? They're able to maintain that consciousness without it being disrupted. They're training themselves on some level of awakening, pseudo enlightenment, whatever terms you want to use. So now, and then they're doing these daily and weekly practices to elongate that experience. And by the time they get to month 5 or 6, if they're ready for that full experience, now they have the full experience. Again, they're offline. Now they're back to that 1, 2. It's not overriding their nervous system. It's not overstimulating their nervous system. They're already familiar with that state. So they have this full peak experience for the first time. They're offline, and then they come back online, and immediately they're like, oh, this is familiar territory that is so less overwhelming on their nervous system. And they already know how to drive the car, right? So what we're seeing is so far, nobody's been destabilized by this process versus in our class, we had a guest speaker come on and said about 3% of the people they work with were having negative or destabilizing experiences. That's a lot. That's a lot of risk for a therapist to want to take, right? So if we can minimize or eliminate those, why wouldn't we? Like, why does this process have to be, we got to do it all today, right? We got to do it all today. You show up, I'll give you maybe a little bit, maybe more, maybe the full experience or maybe multiple full experiences. And again, I should retract that to some degree. That's okay if that's how you want to facilitate. This is just an alternative for people that don't want to facilitate that way, that are looking for a little bit more gentle way of elongating not just the process, but the benefits of this experience.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good timing to have this information then included in the book because we currently are at a point where there are various studies being done at different places in the world around 5-MeO as a therapeutic medicine.
Yes.
Primarily looking at people with severe PTSD, severe depression and anxiety. And a lot of that is being looked at as what happens if we give them a large dose? And then what are the results that we get from that? And we're not yet at a point where there is anywhere in the world necessarily legal or regulated 5-MeO DMT therapy. But it's potentially coming.
Yes.
There's lots of places in the world where 5-MeO DMT is legal. You know, it's like we were mentioning before about people who are maybe already facilitating or they already have access. Like as we know, Canada is one of these places. You can walk into a head shop in Canada and you can walk out with a 5-MeO DMT vape pen
Right.
with like no preparation, no education, nothing. So it's already out there in that sense. People are already doing it. They're already facilitating. And because it's still a limited access commodity of the 5-MeO experience, that tends to push people more towards, let's just do the big one, because people have to travel for it.
Yes.
Or they have to take time off of work for it. And so there's that sense of pressure that, well, if I'm taking this time to travel across the country or to another country or halfway around the world in order to have this experience. I want to maximize whatever that is. But here with this model, as we are potentially moving into legal therapy, where somebody can work with a local clientele over a 6-month period, where people aren't having to travel and make extraordinarily plans in order to be able to work with 5-MeO, that know that, well, I can go to my local therapist and I can do this and work my way through this whole program. Again, I think it's just the perfect time period to introduce this model to people as the world of psychedelic therapy grows, because then you're already laying the groundwork for how people might consider doing this kind of work in a way where people are able to kind of stretch their legs through the experience rather than, okay, let's bundle up and let's jump off the cliff. Which I get. I think that there's value in that as well, because it's so in agreement with you. I don't want to say you can't serve full release doses, because I think that that's of tremendous value. But it's just about, we want to have options on the menu.
Yes. Why can't we have an alternative model, right?
Right. So here are guidelines for another option on the menu.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I love how you articulated that, because you're right. And I think it's how it's proposed or introduced to people. We should be really cautious about just the full experience. Again, some of the folks I was talking to today, they felt depressed and anxious and like maybe it was their fault that they didn't have the experience they thought they were supposed to have. And I'm like, well, what experience is that? It's the experience that your friend told you were supposed to have. That was their experience, right? So, a lot of folks are showing up ready for this life-altering, immediately change. I'm going to be different on this one experience. And I think that could cause that could have problems to it, right? You see people that it was my fault, or I did something wrong, or this medicine is not good. So I'm in agreement. Having the full, I think we both agree that there is something about the full experience that can't be mimicked in smaller or medium experiences. There's just something about it. So ultimately, there is something about that large experience. But do we have to do it today? Does it have to happen right now? So that's all it is exactly what you said. If I needed to take antidepressants and I showed up to my psychiatrist and he's like, you need antidepressant. Well, he doesn't start me with the largest dose, right? It's like minimum effective dose, and let's figure out what that is. Let's work our way up to the full dose if you need it. Why can't we approach this medicine, again, potentially with this alternative of like, what's the rush? What's the rush? Because it's not just about having the experience. It can open a door, but if you don't know what to do when you walk through that door, you're going to go back to your baseline reality. I don't know anybody that was completely enlightened after their first experience. They might have had an enlightened experience of like, oh, that's what it's like, because that was my experience. I'm like, oh, that's what the monks are doing at the monastery for 30 years. I got a taste of it, right? I'm not that. Right? That's the practices, and that's how the work to kind of embody those characteristics or that understanding of non-duality and how to live that way. That takes time. So again, by elongating this process, you're giving people a much better opportunity to embody those practices and embody those understandings and live them so they become habitual and therefore their new baseline reality. So you nailed it. It's just an alternative. And I think it's phase 2 trials right now for some place. I think the last time I looked, it was at phase 2 trials. So we're getting there. In the next few years, it will be available for therapeutic. But also, as we talked about prior to the call, we've got some students in the class that are from Ukraine or some of these other areas that are using it in therapeutic practices. So I don't think that I think this is now the time to offer an alternative use of this or alternative practice, because it is shifting into that space of more and more people are trying to figure out how to use it for therapeutic purposes.
Yeah. So I think we've touched on the various modules within the class and as they are presented within the book. So something else that we included in the book via the appendix is some of the different forms that are associated with the class, and by doing this trauma informed, more sort of therapeutic approach around working with 5-MeO DMT. So what are some of those forms? What is some of the information that people can find in looking through that appendix, and how could it serve them in their own facilitation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you and I spend a lot of time on in the class is informed consent. Um, again, one of the folks I was talking to this week, similar to me, they showed up, they had the experience. I'm just a believer that before somebody has this experience, they should know all the possible outcomes, the good, the bad, the ugly, right?
Yeah.
That's true informed consent. Hey, this could happen. It's a potential for destabilization. Do we have a care provider in place if that happens? It's possible that all your clothes may come off, right? And that'd be okay. So it's not creating fear, but sharing all the possible outcomes of what can happen with this medicine, and then them consenting to that. I see that very rare because, again, a lot of the folks that I'm seeing that are working with it, I don't want to say they're selling it, but the fear is, and I've heard this from folks, well, I don't want to scare them away. I've got
Right.
the opposite perspective. I'd rather them
Yeah.
say no to me than me do something that could potentially cause harm that they weren't aware of. Again, I'm open to your feedback on informed consent, but I know that in the class we spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah, that's always been a big one that I've been pushing, is this idea that not only do I promote the idea that anybody who's facilitating should educate their potential participants around the full spectrum of what might occur within a 5-MeO experience, and also what might occur afterwards. Like, this is
Yes.
one we've talked about a lot, where people facilitate and they don't tell people about reactivations. They don't tell people about potential destabilizations. They don't tell people about ongoing emotional processing. And so these are all things that I think people need to be told up front. And then also, as we talk about these different methods or styles of facilitation, of also informed consent there around how is it that you facilitate? How do you practice? What do you
Yeah.
do? What can I expect from you, the facilitator, within this context, so that people have an understanding that all of that information is communicated ahead of time,
Yeah.
so that they can say, A, do I want this experience? And B, do I want this experience with this person in this context? So that
Agreed.
they're informed and they can consent to it, or they can decline, versus that idea of, well, I don't want to scare people away, or I don't want to tell people too much about what I do because, I don't want them to have preconceptions. I just think that that does a disservice to people
Right.
personally, that
And,
I would never operate that way, and I would never encourage anybody to operate that way.
and I think that's the difference between the way both of us facilitated. And again, with all compassion to the people that are making a living doing this, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Absolutely. I believe in energetic exchange or compensation for your time and the risk. Absolutely. That was just never the position I was in. Right. So to me, it was very easy to, here it is, say no. I can go hiking with the dogs today. Right. I
Yeah.
don't need to do this. I'm not pulled to do this. I don't have to. And that's something important for folks that are listening. If you're considering it, where I find the most people get in trouble is when they're stepping in the facilitation because they quit their day job and they're like, I'm going to make a run at this. And then
Yeah.
when you're a little bit desperate and you're trying to pay the bills with it, that's when the shortcuts start happening. That's when you kind of bend a little bit and flex on areas that you may not normally flex on. And again, I mean that with compassion because I see that a lot. So I always encourage folks, like, if this is what you want to do, maintain your day job,
Yeah.
slowly but surely build yourself up where you can financially sustain yourself before you step into this. And you need to do this. And again, I've been blessed that I never needed to do this. So again, very comfortable with people saying no. Like, I've got other things I can do today, um, safety support. I'm looking at the book now, just trying to refresh some of the things. Medical history, obviously important. What type of medications are you taking? What type of contraindications? Not just medical contraindications, but psychological contraindications. And not just medications, but now a lot of folks are taking peptides and supplements. Methylene blue is one that comes to mind, kratom, kana. How do these supplements that, again, aren't medically prescribed, how are they going to impact the experience? Are they going to impact it in a negative way? Are they dangerous? We need to know everything about our client or our participant, what they're taking in. I like to do a psychological evaluation just in the sense of I want to understand where they're coming from. Why are they stepping in the space? You can call it their intention, whatever it may be. I just want to know their background. I want to know their history and their background, what's bringing them to the space, because it also allows me to design the space to some degree that's going to be conducive to where they are and how they feel, how they're going to react to it. And that can be, what type of gender do I have in the space? Do I have a female assistant? Is it a gentleman that would rather not have another female around? They just want one, and vice versa. And I think that's something you and I kind of agree on. I think a lot of the models out there, like you need both male and female, right? And I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm not opposed to that, but I think sometimes I have two men, sometimes I have two women, right? I think, you can curate that space depending on how the person wants that space to be to some degree. I think there's benefits to them both, but I don't have a hard, fast rule that you need one man and one woman in the space. That's just not, I see the
Yeah.
benefits of it, but I don't, that's not a hard and fast rule for me, but I could learn that through the intake process.
Right. And that's where education, first of all, comes in, and then having informed conversations with people that it allows us to be flexible and responsive to what's actually present with any given person rather than being dogmatic about
Yes.
how facilitation must take place and what you must do versus what does this person say they need? And then can I provide that or not? What can we do? How do we work with this person? It makes it more of a collaborative affair than it is a
Yeah.
top-down dogmatic structure of like, well, if you don't have both a man and a woman in this space, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
That's way too absolute.
Yeah, that's a much better explanation than mine. I think the concept of a collaborative approach is what I emphasize. And we've talked about it in the past too. To me, or the way that I think that we both run the class in the sense is my focus is on safety, right? Can you keep people physically safe, spiritually safe, psychologically safe, right? What type of safety do we have in place here? And then kind of what you do before that outside. I mean, safety obviously entails doing the right intake process, creating a relationship with them. But as far as ritual is concerned, ritual, no ritual, what type of process you like to go through? And we've got friends that have an hour to 2 hour long rituals that they just absolutely believe in. And I think it's authentic to them. So I'm like, absolutely, if that's authentic to you and that's what you want to do and you believe it, all for that. Where I have a concern is it for a show? Is it a show? Are you doing this? It's not really authentic to you, but you want to create this show of look how magical I am, look how special I am. But if it's authentic to you, do it. If you have no ritual, do it. I mean, my ritual is kind of shrunk down to almost where you're at. Even the prayer that I used to use, I've shifted. It's like very non-dual and very clean and cut. I'll share with you sometime. But it's very basic just to kind of get them in the space, have them relax. But that's it. That's it. But it's okay to show up however authentically you want to show up. Because again, it's like I have my way. It's not the way, it's just a way. But I'm not as concerned about that. If you're showing up authentically, there's a lot of space for you to be yourself in the space.
Yeah. So I think we can probably wrap it up with just a bit of a conversation around the inclusion of some autobiographical details about yourself within the book and some stories and personal anecdotes. I'm just curious how that process was for you in terms of like writing those things up, choosing to share them in the book, because, that's a choice. It could be, no, we just want to make it clinical. And like, here's the information, here's the structure of the class, here are the forms, here's all the T's we're crossing and the I's that we're dotting. And that was certainly something that I invited you to, or encourage you, like, well, I want to hear more about Kerby in this book, in addition to all of this great information that we got in here. So how was that process for you? How did you go about selecting what you chose to share or maybe not share? Or yeah.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to model and maybe I did it effectively, maybe ineffectively. People have to determine for themselves. And maybe I could ask your opinion on it was, here are all the mistakes I made. Here's all the ego traps that I fell into, right? Here's where I got off track. Here's where I was doing it wrong. And I think in the facilitation community, there's this idea that we have to have it all figured out and be perfect, right? Like I've got it all figured out. I'm the first one to say that I didn't, and I'm not saying I do now because history has shown me every time I thought I had it figured out, I didn't. So what would make me think that now I have it all figured out? So if we can't be open and honest about the traps that we fell into and the mistakes we made, I don't think we're going to grow. But more importantly, I want to prevent other people from having to go through them, right? I had the cool outfit at some stage, right? I fell into some of these ego traps that you, as a new facilitator, are likely to fall into. And I want to make it okay to say, it got me, right? The ego's a funny thing. It can get you. And when you think it's not got you, it's probably got you. So I just really wanted to add some stories that are like, here's where I got stuck. Here's where I got trapped. Here's where I was emotional and flawed. And here's some of the struggles that I went through. Because I want to create a space where new people could also say, oh, that resonates, or it got me, or I'm in that quicksand right now. So, because again, what I'm not ever claiming to say is like I'm the greatest facilitator on the planet. That's far from the truth. There's lots of more experienced people than me. There's lots of people that have been doing this significantly longer, that have more history in the space. I think what I'm trying to bring to the space is just this hunger for more understanding. And I've always been interested in what's happening with this. It's like, again, folks that we know, like I've served 10,000 people, but it's always been the same way. I'm not as interested in that. I'm more interested in I've changed it and I've adjusted it and I've shifted it and I've learned and I've evolved. That's kind of what I'm trying to bring to the table is here's all the stages I went through, and maybe that will be beneficial for you versus here's how you do it. So that's how I kind of tried to choose the stories. I tried to make them personal. I tried to add just a little bit of I guess something more interesting. So again, if we're talking about the gender that we touched on, well, what's a good story to kind of show how that plays out in a real life scenario, or where anecdotally, where I've gone through those experiences. And then again, the beginning of the book is just kind of my personal story of like, look, here's where I was. Here's where I've worked through. I'm proud is kind of an ego trap, but I'm really proud of the person I've evolved into. Like my wife and I did some medicine the other day, and we were kind of giggling to each other. It's like, I feel like we know a secret that other people don't know, right? And that secret's just completely changed our marriage in the way that we show up for our daughter or the way we show up for our friends. And it's because of this journey that I've been on and all the trappings and all the sticky parts that were part of it. So I want to share that with people and potentially show them that facilitation isn't just about other people, it's about us too. And we have an opportunity to grow and evolve and become better humans. That's my favorite part of this facilitation journey, is who I've ultimately been able to become, and who I'm still becoming. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it absolutely does. And I think that it enriches the book. And I always like to teach through examples. And, I bring those into class like all the time. Like, let me give you an example here about this time that I worked with this person, or this integration call that I had, that it makes it relatable. It takes things out of the abstract and makes it more concrete. And, we can talk about, these ideas of being trauma informed or providing good integration, providing good facilitation. And we could set out, there's lots of bullet points in the book and there's lots of numbered lists and stuff like that. But then it's those actual examples of like, okay, so let me spell this out for you by telling you a story. I just think it makes it very relatable to people. It applies the knowledge. It moves it from the abstract into something that's more concrete and more material, and just creates it at a more relatable level. So I'm really glad that you added all those portions into the book. Like I wrote in the foreword, I said, this is the kind of stuff that would come out in class, but it wasn't in the book in the first place. But putting them into the book kind of makes it more into that personal dialogue of sharing, revealing, and we're asking students to be vulnerable,
Yes.
be your authentic self, own up to yourself. And then
Yes.
here's the example of me doing that, and me also being vulnerable, and me exploring what it means to be my authentic self and where I've changed and why I've changed. That I think all of that serves a pedagogical purpose. So to have
Yeah.
it in the book, I think is great. To have it in class, I think it is great. And that's also, when we interact with the students, that we also get their personal stories all the time. Um, and so it just makes it that we can really relate at a human level. And that's what
Yes.
all of this is about. All of us are just these lost, scared human beings. Some of us are more traumatized than others, but it's hard being a human being. And so having connection, having guidance, having some roadmaps for how do we navigate not only being human, but also potentially serving and helping others in their process of being a more healthy, grounded, authentic human being as well. Like, let's all collaborate together. And
Yeah.
I
Well,
think the book does it.
again, I appreciate you. When I first sent you the first draft with my story in it, I was like, well, we'll see. But you're like more of that. Like and I really appreciated that because I think you've been around me enough that I'd like to think that I have some level of humility. I didn't want to make the book about me, and I don't
Yeah.
think it is about me.
No.
But I wanted to use some of those stories and examples for that reason of like, here, we're all flawed, we're all struggling, but also because some of the stuff that we're talking about in the actual text itself or the manual itself, it's nuanced, right? How do you dress for ceremony? Like there's nuance to all that. It's so, as you mentioned earlier, it's not just black and white, it's this, not that. And so I think the stories allow this nuance to kind of play out, right? And I think that's important. So yeah, I'm really grateful that you encouraged that.
Yeah. Well, Kerby, it was a pleasure working on the book with you. I'm a project junkie. And when you came to me with like, do you think we could work on this? I was like, oh yeah, come on, send it my way. So thank you for fulfilling my insatiable desire to work on projects and to help other people out that I really enjoy doing that kind of work. So thank you for providing me with that. And I think that it is a significant contribution to the literature that's available about 5-MeO-DMT and facilitation. I think it's a unique book in the field. There isn't really anything else like it out there. So I hope that it finds a wide and receptive audience among people who are both curious about the facilitation and work with 5-MeO-DMT, maybe some budding therapists, and also people who are interested in pursuing it further and actually getting some direct training, whether it's through Mindscape or another program. That it's part of the material that's in the toolkit that's now available in this book. So to remind the audience, it's Trauma-Informed 5-MeO-DMT Facilitation, an educational manual by Stephan Kerby, director of the Mindscape Institute.
Well, I appreciate it. Again, I appreciate all the support and careful what you wish for. I already tried to suck you into the next project. But yeah, thanks for dealing with me. Working with somebody with ADHD like me couldn't have been always fun, but you handled it like a champ. And I think we've created something pretty unique. And for that, I'm grateful. So thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for your time today, Kerby. And I probably will next see you again on Zoom in class
I
as we
appreciate it.
continue to work at Mindscape Institute.
I appreciate it.